Eric Cole brought his mistress to dinner inside the restaurant his wife had helped him build, then looked at his wife and asked her to serve them. For one long second, Nina Cole thought she had misunderstood him. The flagship Table 9 restaurant was full. Soft music moved beneath the sound of glasses and quiet conversation. Nina had prepared the private table near the window for what Eric had called their anniversary dinner. But Eric had not come alone. Tina James, the company's brand consultant, sat beside him in a cream evening dress. Worse, she sat in the carved founder's chair always reserved for Nina. Eric did not apologize. He touched the empty plate before Tina and said, "Nina, you are already standing. Serve us." A waiter froze. From the kitchen entrance, Ruth Lane stared at him. The serving plate grew heavy in Nina's hands. Her fingers trembled, so she tightened them around the rim. She had spent 12 years building this company, training its first workers, negotiating with suppliers, and keeping it alive when there was barely enough money for salaries. Eric had become the public face, but Nina had built the systems beneath him. Now her husband was treating her like a stranger in her own restaurant, and every worker close enough to see it understood the insult. Tina lowered her eyes, but she did not leave the chair. Nina could have dropped the plate. Instead, she stepped closer and looked at the table. That was when she saw the black access badge beside Tina's phone. It carried the Table 9 logo. Beneath Tina's name were two words Nina had never approved: Executive Access. Nina set the plate down carefully. "Who gave you this?" Eric adjusted his cuff. "It is only for the new project." "What new project?" Before Tina answered, Nina's phone vibrated. A message from the company office announced an emergency ownership meeting at noon the next day. Nina read it twice. When she looked up, Eric was no longer smiling. "What exactly is happening at noon?" she asked. "An investor wants to enter the company," Eric said. "We need the money. The meeting is only a formality." "A formality I knew nothing about?" "You have been busy with operations." "I am the operations director." Tina placed her phone face down. "Eric said the company needed faster decisions." Nina turned to her. "And that gave you executive access?" Eric lifted his glass. "Can we not turn dinner into an interrogation?" Ruth appeared beside the table carrying water nobody had requested. "Sir, there is a problem in the kitchen, the kind Mrs. Cole normally handles." Nina followed her through the kitchen doors. The moment they were alone, Ruth said, "Tell me I did not just watch your husband bring another woman here and order you to serve her." "You watched it. And she is sitting in your chair." "The chair is not the problem. She has an executive badge." Ruth's anger became concern. "You did not approve it?" "No." "Then we check who did." In the back office, Nina entered her code. The system showed ordinary staff records, but all executive changes had disappeared from her view. Ruth pulled out the manual register. Tina's badge had been issued that morning and authorized by Eric. Beneath it was another entry for an executive review at noon. Nina photographed the page just as the office door opened. Eric stood there with one hand in his pocket. "You left our guest alone." "She is not my guest." Nina held up the register. "Why does Tina have access to private company files?" "She is leading the new brand direction." "And the ownership review?" "We need an investor. Come back to the table. We can discuss this at home." At home usually meant quietly. Quietly meant later. Later often meant never. Eric had learned that Nina would absorb an insult if speaking could damage the business. "I will come home when I understand what I am being asked to approve." Eric's expression shifted for 1 second. It was enough. He needed her approval. Before Nina could press him, her phone rang. Dan, one of Table 9's oldest suppliers, said 3 invoices were unpaid and there would be no morning delivery without payment. What unpaid invoices? Nina asked. The last 3. She looked at Eric. He was adjusting his cuff again. Send me the payment history, she told Dan. Eric reached for her phone. Nina stepped back. This is a misunderstanding, he said. Then it should be easy to explain. Tina appeared at the kitchen entrance. Eric looked from her to Nina and Ruth. The dinner is over, he said. Nina remained after he and Tina left. She waited until the front doors closed, then returned to the office with Ruth. Dan's records showed that the supplier money had left the operating account on the correct date, but it had not gone to him. The transfer had been processed as though the supplier had been paid, then redirected to James Brand Partners, Tina's company. Ruth told her to call Ben Moore, the senior accountant. Ben, I need every invoice connected to James Brand Partners tonight, Nina said when he answered. I cannot access those files from home. You approved the payment codes. After a long silence, Ben lowered his voice. Do not do anything until I speak to Eric. The call ended. A second later, Nina's financial screen went blank. Access denied. She tried again. Nothing. Can he do that? Ruth asked. Not alone. The bank officer did not answer. Eric had chosen his moment carefully, late enough that offices were closed, early enough for him to move money before morning. I am going home, Nina said. Ruth blocked the door. To give him another chance to explain what you can already see. If I accuse him without complete records, he will call me jealous. If I move too quickly and the company suffers, the workers will pay. And if you move too slowly? Nina had no answer. The house was dark when she arrived. Eric sat in the living room with his jacket removed and his laptop open. You embarrassed me tonight, he said. You brought your mistress into my restaurant. Our restaurant. Then you asked one of its founders to serve her. You turned a simple request into a public scene. Nina ignored the trap. Why did company money go to Tina? Why are suppliers unpaid? Why was I locked out? She provided services. We have cash flow pressure, and you began downloading private documents during an emotional confrontation. For years, Eric had turned difficult questions into arguments about Nina's tone. If she raised her voice, he called her unreasonable. If she stayed calm, he treated her silence as permission. He made her defend the way she asked instead of answering what she asked. Not tonight. I want every transfer, loan and agreement connected to tomorrow's meeting. You will receive the documents in the morning. I want them now. Eric closed the laptop. The company needs capital. Tina will lead the brand division. You will remain involved in operations. And ownership? You will see the proposal tomorrow. Nina stood. You have 1 hour to restore my access and send the complete accounts. If you do not, I contact every investor, supplier, and senior employee before sunrise. Eric studied her, then nodded. 1 hour. It was the answer she wanted. That should have frightened her. Eric rarely agreed quickly unless the agreement gave him something. But Nina was tired and still hoped the company could be protected from a public war. Nina went upstairs and waited. 20 minutes later, Ben messaged her not to contact him again. Then the ownership meeting was moved from noon to 10:30. She called Eric. No answer. Downstairs, the living room was empty. His laptop and the car keys were gone. On Nina's backup portal, 2 folders had disappeared. A third was being transferred. Eric had not agreed to explain. He had bought an hour without interruption. By the time Nina reached the restaurant, it was almost 2 in the morning. Ruth waited at the rear entrance. A security officer blocked the finance archive. Mr. Cole ordered that nobody enter until after the ownership review. Nina asked to see the instruction. The message confirmed that her founder access had been restricted. Years earlier, when Table 9 owned one restaurant and one unreliable computer, Nina had created emergency backups. She had copied supplier contracts, account references, and access keys onto drives stored outside the finance office. Eric had mocked her for preparing for disasters that had not happened. When the company expanded, Nina updated the box less often, but it could still show where money should have gone. Now, the disaster wore his name. In the storage room, she pulled down a metal box containing old drives, supplier contracts, and emergency keys. The latest backup was 3 months old, but it still held the company's payment structure. Nina searched for James Brand partners. Some invoices were legitimate. Tina's company had designed menus, advertising campaigns, and launch materials. Others were duplicated, inflated, or attached to a branch that had never opened. One description appeared twice with different amounts. Another claimed a complete campaign for a location that existed only in an abandoned proposal. The records proved someone had used real work to hide false charges. Then a printer began operating in the next room. Ruth lifted the pages from the tray. They were branch closure preparations and termination notices. 23 employees were listed. 2 branches were marked for immediate closure after the investor agreement. "You need to tell the staff," Ruth said. "Not until I know whether these are final. They have names on them. If people panic, they may leave before we can save anything." Ruth placed the papers between them. "You are still deciding when people are allowed to know their lives are changing." Nina wanted to argue that leadership sometimes required silence. But the termination pages carried the names of people who had trusted her for years. Protecting them could not mean keeping them ignorant until the decision was irreversible. The words struck because Nina could not dismiss them. Ben called. "You helped Eric delete records," Nina said. "I moved files because he said the investor demanded confidentiality. You removed my access. I followed an executive instruction. You knew I was a founder. I also knew the company could miss payroll." Nina went still. She ordered Ben to bring every record he had kept outside the system. When he hesitated, she told him the duplicate invoices and termination notices carried his approval codes. Ben arrived shortly after 6 with an old black laptop. "I did not take money," he said. "That is not the same as telling the truth." He opened an offline ledger he had kept because the official reports no longer matched the bank statements. The figures showed that Eric's failed expansion was not temporary. The first new branch had cost far more than he reported. A second had opened with borrowed money. A third project had been financed by delaying suppliers and moving cash from salaries, maintenance, and taxes. Whenever one account approached collapse, Eric covered it with money taken from another. The official reports showed growth by treating expected investment as secured money. Each month, Eric shifted the shortage somewhere else, leaving Nina to solve operational problems without knowing they were symptoms of a much larger failure. At the bottom was the full debt. Ruth sat down. "How long?" Nina asked. "Almost 18 months, Ben said. "And the investor?" "The investor will cover the urgent debts, but only if control transfers to a new holding group. Eric remains managing director. Tina becomes brand director." "And me?" Ben looked away. "You keep a minority interest and an operations contract." After 12 years, Nina would become an employee in the company she created. Her name would remain in the history, but the authority attached to it would be gone. Eric would keep the title, and Tina would receive the future he had promised her, while Nina signed away the right to stop them. "If I reject it? The bank may freeze the accounts. Suppliers stop deliveries. We may miss payroll." Ruth said, "Then we expose Eric and stop the agreement." Ben shook his head. Stopping the agreement does not remove the debt. The room became quiet. Outside, the first morning traffic moved past the restaurant while the three of them stared at a company already running out of time. Nina had believed Eric invented a crisis to replace her. He had not. He had used a real crisis. At 10:30, she would have to decide whether defeating her husband was worth closing the doors on everyone who trusted her. At 8 that morning, Eric gathered the senior staff in the restaurant. "My wife discovered my relationship with Tina last night," he told them. "She is hurt, but she is allowing a private matter to threaten the future of this company." Nearly 30 employees stood between the tables, frightened by rumors of closure. Some had worked with Nina since the first restaurant. Others had joined only months earlier. They knew only that salaries and rent depended on the doors opening the next day. "The investor agreement protects salaries and keeps the business open," Eric continued. "If Nina blocks it, the consequences will be hers." Every face turned toward her. "The company is in serious financial trouble," Nina said. "It was hidden from me. Payments were moved, records restricted, and termination notices prepared. Some of you may lose your jobs under Eric's agreement." A supervisor asked, "Do you have another investor?" "Not yet." The fear deepened. One employee said, "Then sign it." A woman from the second branch asked whether the closure notices were real. Nina said the documents had been prepared but not yet approved. That answer brought little comfort. Fear moved through the room faster than any explanation she could give. Another objected, but the first man shook his head. "I have children. Respect will not pay my rent." Eric allowed the argument to grow. He did not need everyone to support him. He only needed them to fear Nina's refusal. Tina moved to the presentation screen. The new structure gives Table 9 enough capital to settle urgent debts and rebuild the brand. Nina looked at her. "Does your presentation include the liabilities attached to your shares?" Tina stopped. "What liabilities?" Eric closed the folder in his hand. "Nina is trying to confuse the issue." Nina placed Ben's ledger on the table. "The investor is not giving you clean ownership, Tina. If the company fails, part of the debt moves to your brand company." "That is not what Eric told me." "He did not tell me either." Tina turned to Eric. "You said the old debt would remain with the existing company." "This is not the place," Eric said. Tina picked up her phone and entered the private room. Nina followed. Tina locked the door. "You expect me to believe you are protecting me?" Tina asked. "No. I need to know what Eric promised you. 10% ownership and control of the brand division, in exchange for bringing the investor and helping remove me." Tina's silence answered. She had known about the affair, known Eric wanted Nina reduced to a ceremonial founder, and accepted the chair as though the transfer had already happened. But the shock on her face now was real. She had expected to benefit from Nina's removal, not become the next person Eric sacrificed. Nina swallowed her anger. "Open the presentation." The figures did not match Ben's ledger. Eric had sent Tina several versions over the previous weeks. The oldest showed the real liabilities and the risk attached to the new brand company. In the next version, several debts had been moved into vague categories. In the final presentation, more than half had disappeared. Tina had been preparing to defend an agreement built from numbers Eric knew were false. "He said the accountants corrected it," Tina whispered. "They hid it." Tina searched her messages. "I record important calls because I never trusted him completely." She opened a voice note. Eric's recorded voice filled the room. "Once Nina signs, the investor takes the old liability. Tina receives her shares, and if anything goes wrong later, the brand company carries the public damage. I remain protected as managing director. Tina sat down. He was going to leave the debt with my company. For the first time, she looked less like the woman in Nina's chair, and more like someone who had finally seen the shape of the trap around her. Nina felt no sympathy strong enough to erase what Tina had done, but she understood that Eric's loyalty ended wherever his protection began. "You were willing to take my place," Nina said. "I believed you had abandoned it. You sat in my chair and watched him ask me to serve you." Tina looked away. "I know." Nina held out her hand. "Send me the recording and every version of the presentation." "What happens to me?" "That depends on what you did and what you are prepared to admit." Tina sent the files. Back in the dining room, employees were already gathering their belongings. Ruth told Nina that Dan and 2 other suppliers were waiting at the loading entrance. The men stood beside an empty truck. Dan held the unpaid invoices. "We have waited because of you," he said, "but we cannot carry this company any longer." Nina showed them Eric's proposal. "If it passes, 2 branches close and many workers are dismissed. If I reject it, the bank may freeze the accounts." "Then what are you asking?" 7 days to remove Eric, place the company under independent control, and restructure the debt. "Can you save it?" "I can block his agreement. I cannot promise more than that." Dan looked toward the empty truck. His drivers had made 3 deliveries without full payment because Nina had never broken a promise to him before. He agreed to wait only if the other major suppliers joined the arrangement, employees received formal representation, and the remaining assets came under independent supervision. Nina would also have to place her own management authority under the same rules she wanted applied to Eric. It was the first real opening Nina had found, but accepting it meant Table 9 could no longer remain under Cole family control. Sam Reed arrived shortly before 10. He reviewed Ben's ledger, Tina's files, the supplier conditions, and the founder agreement. "There is a possible structure," he said. "Most jobs may survive if the suppliers cooperate, and the bank grants a temporary standstill." "What will it cost?" Nina asked. "Eric leaves management. Independent administrators control the accounts. Employees and suppliers gain formal representation. And my founder authority, you use it to approve the transition. After that, you no longer control the company." The founder agreement lay open before Nina. A clause written when Table 9 was still small gave either founder power to block a transfer of control. Nina could use it to preserve her ownership and stop Eric, but without new terms, the debt would remain and the workers would face collapse. Or she could use the clause once to approve an independent transition, surrender the protection it gave her, and allow employees and suppliers to share formal power. She could save her position or give the company a chance to survive without either founder controlling it. Sam pushed the restructuring document toward her. "The meeting begins in 20 minutes. Nina picked up the pen. For 12 years, she had believed protecting Table 9 meant keeping it in the family. Now she understood that the family was the reason it needed protection. "I will do it," she said. The emergency meeting began at 10:30 in the same private room where Eric had humiliated her the night before. This time, Nina carried no serving plate. She carried a folder. Eric stood at the head of the table beside the investors, restored to his polished suit and public voice. Tina sat away from him, holding her phone with both hands. Ruth represented the employees. Ben sat beside the offline ledger, looking as though he had not slept. Sam placed the independent proposal before him, but did not open it yet. "The company needs immediate capital," Eric began. "The proposed agreement prevents total closure." He pushed it toward Nina. "All that remains is your signature." Nina did not touch it. My wife is refusing because she discovered my relationship with Tina, Eric told the room. Employees should not suffer because of our marriage. An investor asked, "Without this agreement, what is your alternative?" Nina opened her folder. She placed Tina's access record on the table first, then the supplier timeline, duplicate invoices, and termination notices. She explained how the supplier transfer had been redirected and how her system access disappeared when she began asking questions. Ben connected his offline ledger to the screen and exposed 18 months of concealed losses, delayed payments, and hidden borrowing. The room could now see that the crisis was real, but so was Eric's deception. "None of this changes the need for investment," Eric said. "No," Nina replied. "It changes who should control it." Tina sent the complete voice note to everyone. Eric's recorded plan filled the room. When it ended, he turned on her. "You have destroyed your own future." Tina met his eyes. "You had already decided what my future was worth." Eric looked at Nina. "You still have no money. That is true." Nina slid Sam's restructuring plan across the table. It did not promise an easy rescue. The suppliers would wait for 7 days while the bank considered a temporary standstill. Independent administrators would control the accounts, review every contract, and decide which branch could operate safely. Employees and suppliers would receive formal representation, and neither Eric nor Nina could move company money alone again. Eric read the first page. "This removes me." Yes, it removes you too. It removes both of us from exclusive control. "You are destroying our family legacy to humiliate me." Nina looked at the founder agreement beneath her hand. For 12 years, she had used silence to protect their name. Eric had used that protection to hide behind her. "This is not about humiliating you," she said. "It is about refusing to let everyone else pay for what we did." She signed. The investor agreement was rejected. The restructuring plan passed with conditions. Eric was removed from management before the meeting ended. Outside the room, he tried once more to speak to Nina as her husband rather than the managing director she had just defeated. She told him the marriage had ended the moment he used their company, their employees, and another woman to force her surrender. It did not survive the day. Ben gave a complete statement, returned every copied record, and accepted disciplinary supervision. Tina surrendered the executive badge and received no shares. Her evidence did not erase her part in Nina's removal. Ruth joined the employee committee. Most jobs survived, and the branches remained open, though one closed temporarily while the debts and contracts were reviewed. Months later, Nina entered the flagship restaurant during dinner service. The founder's chair was no longer beside the window. It stood against a wall beneath a display honoring the first employees who had built Table 9. A young server approached her. "Where would you like to sit?" Nina looked toward the kitchen, where Ruth was calling for another order. "Anywhere there is work to do," she said. She had lost the marriage and private control of the company, but she had not lost herself. What would you have chosen if protecting your dignity meant giving up the legacy you spent years building? Some stories stay with you. If this one did, keep it close. Subscribe to African Folktales Ember House for more. Until the next story.